They tell you loyalty pays off, but in the corporate world, it is a blade held by someone else. I built them a data empire worth millions of dollars, only to realize they needed a perfect scapegoat, not a new executive. When federal auditors finally knocked, I did not shed a single tear. I left my badge, walked out the door, and let the automated nooses tighten around their necks. Listen closely. Hello, amazing listeners of the Boss Revenge Stories channel. I want to start by sincerely thanking you for your incredible support, but unfortunately, YouTube has demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to continue operating here. Because of this, we are forced to stop uploading new videos on this platform in the near future, and will be moving our operations entirely to Patreon. If you enjoyed today's story, please support us by joining our Patreon community, where you will find exclusive, true stories that are even better, much longer, and filled with detailed situations we cannot publicize on YouTube, featuring multiple emotional voice actors in a single story. You can join by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the comments section of this video. Now, let us dive into today's story, as told by our main character, Layla Bennett. The air conditioning in the executive boardroom of Ethos Dynamics always ran too cold, but on that particular Tuesday morning, it felt like a cryogenic chamber. I am Layla Bennett, 34 years old, and the lead data systems architect for this very corporation. For the past 3 years, I had bled myself dry for them. I sacrificed weekends, holidays, and any semblance of a personal life to build and stabilize the Nexus project, a multi-million-dollar health data routing infrastructure. As I sat in that oversized leather chair, I had absolute, unshakable faith that the title of Chief Technology Operations Officer would finally be mine. I had earned it. I was the only one who actually understood the behemoth I had created. Then, our Chief Executive Officer, Valerie Sterling, walked in. Valerie possessed the kind of polished, predatory grace that only came from a lifetime of corporate backstabbing. She did not offer small talk. She simply dimmed the lights and clicked her remote. The projector hummed, throwing a single, crisp slide onto the far wall. It was an announcement of the new Chief Technology Operations Officer, but it was not my face on the screen. It was Julian. Julian was an outsider recruited from our biggest rival company. He was a man whose primary qualifications were his pristine golf swing and his deep historical ties to our board of directors. He had zero core knowledge of the system. If you asked him to explain basic data encryption, he would probably stare at you blankly before pivoting to buzzwords about synergy and stakeholder dynamics. Yet, there his face was, plastered in high definition, claiming the throne I had built with my bare hands. The silence in the room was absolute. I could hear the faint, rhythmic ticking of Valerie's ridiculously expensive watch. I waited for her to explain, to offer some corporate excuse about strategic realignments or board mandates. Instead, she flashed a perfectly practiced, sympathetic smile that did not reach her eyes. Layla, we know how vital you are to the daily functioning of Nexus, Valerie said, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. Julian is here to handle the macroscopic stakeholder relationships, but we need you to secure the foundation. To support this power transition and ensure our medical clients feel entirely protected, the legal team requires an updated security framework. She slid a thick, freshly printed document across the gleaming mahogany table. The title page read, Confidentiality and Personal Data Responsibility Agreement. I picked up the pen she offered. It was a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen. I started reading. I have always been meticulous. You do not survive as a systems architect by skimming the documentation. Valerie tapped her manicured fingernails against the table, a subtle sign of impatience, silently urging me to just sign the bottom line like a good, obedient worker drone. I ignored her tapping. I flipped to page 2, then page 3, and finally page 4. There it was, buried halfway down the page. Nested within a dense thicket of legal jargon was a tiny, unassuming clause. It stated that from the moment of signing, all legal liability regarding any structural violations, breaches, or unauthorized rerouting of medical data within the Nexus system would fall entirely on the signatory, me. My blood ran ice cold. They were not just passing me over for a promotion. They were actively framing me. The system handled highly classified, tightly regulated medical data. If anything went wrong, or if they intended to do something wrong, they needed a fall guy. They needed someone who lacked the executive title to defend themselves, but possessed enough technical access to be a believable culprit. I looked up at Valerie. Her eyes were flat, calculating, waiting for my reaction. If I threw the contract in her face and stormed out, I would be fired immediately, stripped of my access, and left powerless. I needed time. I needed leverage. So, I did not react violently. I forced my shoulders to relax. I let out a soft sigh, playing the part of the defeated, loyal employee who just wanted to keep her job. "Of course, Valerie," I murmured. "Whatever the company needs for a smooth transition." I uncapped the pen and pressed the nib to the signature line, but I did not sign my usual name. For years, I have maintained a very specific, deliberate habit for moments of extreme duress. I signed my full name, but I tilted the angle of the letters exactly 15 degrees to the left of my normal, perfectly upright signature. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible deviation, but under forensic analysis, it is the textbook indicator of signing a document under severe stress or coercion, a silent act of rebellion, capturing my hostage situation in ink. Valerie snatched the document back the second I lifted the pen, looking visibly relieved. "Thank you, Layla. Your dedication is truly appreciated," she said, already dismissing me. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked out of the glass boardroom. As the heavy door clicked shut behind me, the reality of the situation locked into place. The Chief Technology Operations Officer title was never meant to be a reward for my hard work. It was a legal umbrella, designed to shield the executive holding it, and Valerie had just smiled, taken that umbrella, and shoved me out into the center of a raging legal storm. They thought they had trapped me, but they had no idea they had just handed the keys to the kingdom to someone who knew how to tear down every single wall from the inside. A few weeks passed. The dust from the executive reshuffle seemed to settle, but the atmosphere on the engineering floor grew thick with a new, unspoken tension. It started subtly. The Nexus system was intricately designed with rigorous, automated compliance checks, meticulously ensuring every single medical device shipment met strict federal safety guidelines before leaving our warehouses. But as the end of the third quarter loomed closer, those life-saving safety nets suddenly became inconvenient obstacles for the new management. I began noticing bizarre anomalies in the routing queues. High-volume shipments of diagnostic monitors and surgical ventilation units were being rightfully flagged by the software for critical quality review. Yet, the system was being forcefully commanded to bypass the standard review procedures entirely. They were desperately trying to accelerate revenue recognition to artificially inflate the quarterly earnings report, and they needed my hands on the keyboard to do it. The commands never came through official channels. Julian, our newly minted executive, treated a paper trail like a venomous snake. He never sent a single email regarding these shipments. He never left a voice message. Instead, my desk phone would ring on the internal secure line, or he would suddenly appear at my cubicle, leaning over the low partition with a conspiratorial, arrogant smirk on his face. "Layla," he would say. His voice dropped to a loud, urgent whisper. "We have a slight bottleneck with the shipment heading to the East Coast distributors. The compliance flags you are seeing are just a software glitch, a known bug. I need you to push it through manually, right now." When I calmly asked for a formal internal support ticket to document the system override, his smirk would vanish, replaced by a cold, hard stare. "We do not have time for bureaucratic red tape," he would snap, tapping his knuckles aggressively against my desk. "Consider this a direct verbal authorization from the executive suite. Just make it happen. Layla, we have massive targets to hit, and the board is watching us closely." I complied. Outwardly, I was the picture of the obedient, beaten-down engineer. I typed the override commands, watched the flashing red warning lights on my dashboard, turn a synthetic, compliant green, and let the unverified shipments roll out into the world. 2 days after the first major batch of bypassed shipments left the loading dock, Valerie summoned me to her corner office. The room smelled of expensive espresso and fresh lilies, a sharp contrast to the stale air of the engineering pit. She was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the sprawling city skyline, holding a pristine, silver envelope. She turned and offered me that same practiced, chillingly warm smile she used in the boardroom. She extended the envelope toward me. Inside was a platinum membership card to the most exclusive wellness spa in the financial district, loaded with thousands of dollars in credit. "You have been working incredibly hard lately, Layla," Valerie said, her tone smooth, melodic, and highly hypnotic. "Julian tells me you have been absolutely instrumental in clearing out the system bottlenecks this week. Your flexibility is literally saving the company. We are moving incredibly fast right now, and I need you to keep up that forward momentum. Enjoy a luxurious weekend of relaxation on me, and just remember to keep everything we do here in the dark. We are a family, and families protect their own." I took the heavy plastic card, thanked her profusely with a perfectly crafted look of gratitude, and promised I would keep the operations running smoothly. I walked back to my desk, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. They honestly thought they had bought my silence with a piece of plastic and a thinly veiled threat disguised as corporate affection. They thought my lack of outward resistance meant my spirit was broken. They were catastrophically wrong. Every single night, after the office completely emptied out and the overhead fluorescent lights switched to their dim, energy-saving mode, my real work began. I did not just blindly push their illegal shipments through the servers. I systematically weaponized the entire infrastructure against them, working deep within the dark source code of Nexus, far below the polished user interface where Julian and Valerie operated. I began architecting a ghost ledger. This ledger was a completely invisible, highly encrypted shadow database. It did not just passively record the manual overrides. It meticulously cataloged the digital fingerprints of every single person involved. Every time Julian gave me a verbal order to bypass a safety protocol, I executed the command, but the ghost ledger silently captured the exact time, the specific terminal identification number, and the internal network address of the executive machine that initiated the original request before it ever reached my desk. It cross-referenced the verbal commands with Julian and Valerie's digital login timestamps, creating an undeniable, ironclad forensic chain of custody that proved without a shadow of a doubt that the illegal orders originated from the very top of the corporate ladder. But a shadow ledger was merely a collection of evidence. I needed a mechanism of execution. I needed a dead man's switch. I spent hours programming a hidden protocol deep into the core validation sequence of the Nexus mainframe. I tied the system's ability to bypass any compliance error directly to my own physical presence and biological signature. The new protocol dictated that the system would only accept a manual override command if my unique biometric authentication, specifically my fingerprint and a retinal scan, was successfully logged into the primary administrator console every 24 hours. If that internal countdown timer hit 0 without my specific biometric signature, the ghost ledger would lock itself down entirely, and the entire national routing system would instantly revert to its maximum security setting. No more bypasses, no more secrets. As I built this invisible, elaborate trap, I dug deeper into the raw data they were forcing me to push through the network. What I found hiding in the technical specifications made the blood freeze in my veins. This was not just a white-collar crime about rushing revenue to make a quarterly goal look pretty for the shareholders. The diagnostic monitors and ventilation units we were shipping were structurally and critically defective. They had completely failed the internal stress and safety tests. The company was deliberately smuggling medical equipment that did not meet the rigorous, non-negotiable safety standards of the Food and Drug Administration out into the open market, putting actual human lives at severe risk. They were doing it to secure a massive financial lifeline. By showing inflated, immediate revenue from these fraudulent shipments, Aetherus Dynamics was desperately attempting to meet the brutal deadline for a commercial loan renewal worth tens of millions of dollars. If they missed that deadline, The entire company would default and go bankrupt within days. Suddenly, the heavily worded contract Valerie had forced me to sign in the boardroom made terrifying, perfect sense. It was not just a corporate shield, it was my carefully drafted legal death warrant. When those defective machines eventually failed in the hospital wards, when the federal investigators came tearing through our digital records looking for someone to blame, Valerie and Julian would simply point to the system logs, point to my signature on that confidentiality agreement, and claim that the rogue systems architect had bypassed the safety protocols entirely on her own for some twisted personal reason. I was being set up to take the fall for a multi-million-dollar federal crime. I did not scream. I did not confront them. I did not let a single emotion slip through the cracks of my professional facade. I simply closed my heavy laptop every night at exactly 11 o'clock, walked out to the empty parking lot, and drove home in absolute silence. Every morning, I arrived back at the office at exactly 8 o'clock. I smiled warmly at the security guard in the lobby, brewed a fresh pot of dark roast coffee in the employee break room, and offered Julian a polite, deferential greeting when he swaggered past my desk. I played the role of the loyal, unsuspecting, entirely replaceable pawn to absolute perfection. I sat in my ergonomic chair, gently sipping my coffee, watching them build their fragile empire of lies on top of my invisible foundation, and I patiently, quietly waited for Judgment Day. Friday morning arrived exactly like any other, but the air felt brittle, charged with static electricity. At precisely 8 o'clock, a piercing alert echoed from the executive wing. It was not a standard notification. It was the high-priority, red flag chime of an urgent board-level email. Within seconds, the quiet hum of the engineering floor shattered. Whispers erupted into frantic shouts. Chairs scraped violently against the carpet. The message had just hit the internal network, and the news was apocalyptic for Aetheris Dynamics. An independent, federal government audit team was currently en route. They would be walking through our front glass doors in exactly 45 minutes to conduct a massive, unannounced, random inspection of our logistics and compliance databases. Total, unadulterated chaos consumed the office. Engineers were running down the aisles. Julian was somewhere in the distance, screaming into his mobile phone, his voice cracking under the sudden weight of federal scrutiny. But my eyes were fixed on the hallway leading from the corner offices. Valerie burst through the double doors, sprinting toward my cubicle. The polished, predatory executive grace she usually wore had completely vanished. Her designer blazer was unbuttoned. Her face was flushed a blotchy, panicked red, and she was breathing heavily, her chest heaving as she leaned hard against the low partition of my desk. "Layla," Valerie gasped, her voice a ragged, desperate hiss. "You need to wipe everything, right now. Go into the back-end servers and wipe all temporary data queues. Clear the cache on the bypass commands. Purge the routing history for the last 3 weeks." I sat perfectly still, my hands resting lightly on my lap. I did not touch the keyboard. I did not even look at the screen. I just stared at her. Seeing my lack of movement, Valerie slammed her palm on my desk, leaning in closer, her eyes wide with frantic terror. "Did you hear me? They are going to be here in less than an hour. You need to scrub the system, and then I need you to draft an email to the board. You are going to prepare a personal apology script. You will state that a recent software patch you developed introduced a critical routing glitch, and that you bypassed the compliance checks accidentally while trying to fix your own error. Do you understand? You take the hit for the software glitch. We manage the auditors, and the company survives. Do it, now." The sheer audacity of her demand hung in the air. She wanted me to digitally erase their federal crimes and then publicly confess to committing them myself, completely destroying my own life to shield her from prison. I did not type a single line of code. I did not argue, moving with deliberate, agonizing slowness. I reached out and gently closed the lid of my laptop. The screen went black, cutting off the glow on Valerie's pale face. I opened my top drawer and pulled out a single sheet of crisp, white paper. I had printed it 2 weeks ago. There were no flowery words, no corporate pleasantries, and no 2 weeks of notice. It was a formal declaration of resignation, effective immediately. I slid it across the desk, stopping exactly where her hand was still slammed against the wood. Valerie looked at the paper, then back at me. Her expression morphed from panic to absolute, venomous rage. "What is this?" she hissed, her voice rising to a shrill, hysterical pitch. "You cannot do this. You signed a binding contract. Layla, if you walk out that door right now, I will personally sue you into oblivion. I will drag you through federal court for breach of contract and corporate sabotage. You are the only person in this entire building who holds the master root passwords. You are the only one who can decrypt the safety logs. If you leave, the system freezes, and I will make sure you spend the next 10 years paying for the damage." The bomb was ticking down. The chaos around us was a blur of running bodies and ringing phones, but in our little space, time had completely stopped. I reached up and unclipped the heavy, plastic employee badge from my collar. I held it for a brief second, feeling the weight of the last 3 years. Before dropping it gently on top of the resignation letter, it landed with a soft, final thud. I stood up, ensuring I was perfectly at eye level with her. I let a small, genuinely peaceful smile form on my lips. I looked directly into her frantic, terrified eyes. "I am not sabotaging anything, Valerie," I said, my voice calm, steady, and loud enough to cut through her hysteria. "I am simply returning the system to its original, legally compliant state. Good luck with the audit." I turned my back on her and walked away. I did not run. I matched my pace to the steady, rhythmic beating of my own heart. I walked past the frantic engineers, past Julian, who was clutching his head near the water cooler, and straight toward the elevator bank. Behind me, I could hear Valerie screaming my name, threatening me, ordering me to come back, but her voice grew fainter with every step I took. I pressed the down button. It was exactly 8:40 in the morning. As the metal doors of the elevator slid open, I stepped inside and turned to face the lobby. Through the glass partition that overlooked the ground floor, I could see them, a team of stern-looking men and women in dark suits, carrying heavy leather briefcases, had just walked through the main revolving doors. The federal auditors had arrived. As the elevator doors began to close, cutting off my view of the collapsing empire, my phone started vibrating violently in my pocket. It was Valerie, then Julian, then the board of directors. The screen lit up with a barrage of desperate, incoming calls. I pulled the phone out, looked at the flashing screen for one final moment, and calmly held down the power button. The screen faded to black. The vibrating stopped. The silence in the elevator was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I crossed the busy avenue and pushed open the heavy wooden door of a small, independent coffee shop situated exactly opposite the towering glass facade of Aetherist Dynamics. The morning rush had died down, leaving the cafe relatively quiet. I ordered a large dark roast coffee, paid with cash, and took a seat at a high table directly facing the panoramic window. From this vantage point, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the corporate monolith I had just abandoned. I reached into my coat pocket and retrieved a cheap, prepaid smartphone I had purchased weeks ago for this exact moment. I turned it on, connected to a secure, encrypted virtual private network, and opened a custom terminal application. I had not left a backdoor that could be exploited to alter the system, but I had left a tiny read-only window to observe the server logs in real time. The black screen immediately filled with lines of rapidly scrolling green text. I watched the digital clock in the corner of the screen. At exactly 9 o'clock, the 24-hour biometric countdown timer buried deep inside the Nexus Core architecture hit absolute zero. Because I was not standing at the administrator console to provide my retinal scan and fingerprint, the Ghost Ledger executed its final directive. The scrolling green text on my screen instantly turned a violent, flashing red. The hidden protocol was officially triggered. Deep inside the servers across the street, Nexus slammed shut. It systematically severed every external connection, instantly froze all outgoing logistics queues, and forcefully transitioned the entire infrastructure into a state of FDA absolute security. Every single loading dock door in our warehouses across the country automatically locked. Every unauthorized shipment was flagged, quarantined, and digitally sealed. I watched the log files tell the story of the panic unfolding on the fourth floor. Julian was trying to fight the system. He was logged into his executive terminal, desperately firing commands to force the logistics queues back open. But Julian was an outsider. He did not know how to write a single line of raw code. He only knew how to click buttons on a polished interface. The logs updated furiously. Unauthorized override attempt detected. User Julian. Access denied. Unauthorized brute force command detected. User Julian. Access denied. Every single time he tried to smash his way through the security protocols. My ghost ledger reacted. It did not just block him, it weaponized his ignorance. The system began automatically generating massive, highly detailed error reports outlining his exact illegal commands, and it forwarded those reports straight to the local network node. Specifically, it sent them directly to the temporary guest network credentials that had just been issued to the federal audit team sitting in the boardroom on the fourth floor. Julian was actively feeding the government investigators a live stream of his own frantic attempts to bypass federal safety laws. My burner phone buzzed against the wooden table. It was not a network alert. It was a transcribed voice message forwarded from my primary phone, which was currently sitting powered off in my pocket. It was Valerie. Over the next 20 minutes, she left dozens of them. The transcriptions painted a pathetic, satisfying picture of a crumbling tyrant. The first message was purely authoritative. Layla, this is not a game. Get back up here this instant and fix this server crash, or I will make sure you never work in the technology sector again. 5 minutes later, the tone shifted to absolute panic. Layla, please, the auditors are locking down the network. Julian broke something and the screens are locked. Pick up the phone. I will tear up the contract. I will give you the promotion. Just come back. 10 minutes after that, it devolved into pure, hysterical sobbing. Please, Layla, I am begging you. They are looking at the medical device bypass history. They have my internet protocol address. Just come back and type the override line. I will give you whatever you want. Please do not do this to me. I deleted the messages one by one without listening to the audio. I did not need to hear her voice. The cold, hard data on my screen was enough. According to the server logs, the auditors had finally demanded full administrative access to the core database to trace the origin of the massive error reports. I could perfectly visualize the scene. Julian, sweating through his custom-tailored suit, frantically pointing his finger and loudly blaming the rogue data architect who had just stormed out of the building. He would tell them I sabotaged the network out of spite. But the system logs were completely immutable. As the auditors pulled the access history, the undeniable truth populated their screens. The records proved that all administrative privileges associated with Layla Bennett were manually revoked and permanently locked at exactly 8:25 in the morning. That was a full 15 minutes before the system crash occurred, and 20 minutes before Julian began executing his frantic, illegal override commands. My digital alibi was mathematically perfect. I was practically a ghost, and they were caught holding the murder weapon. I lifted my paper cup and took a slow, deliberate sip of my dark roast coffee. It was still perfectly hot. Down on the avenue below, the regular flow of morning traffic was suddenly interrupted by a piercing, authoritative wail. I watched over the rim of my coffee cup as 3 heavily armored, black sport utility vehicles with flashing red and blue lights aggressively cut across the intersection. They belonged to the Federal Economic Crimes Division. They swerved onto the pristine circular driveway of Aetherist Dynamics, their tires squealing against the pavement, and threw their vehicles into park right in front of the grand glass doors. Officers in tactical vests poured out, marching purposefully toward the lobby. It was a spectacular, unprecedented event in the entire, supposedly flawless history of the corporation. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had completely swallowed them whole. The federal auditors did not find a single trace of manipulation from my account when they executed a forced, deep diagnostic sweep of the Nexus mainframe. Expecting to find the sabotage Julian had so loudly promised them, My core architecture responded exactly as programmed. It recognized the hostile external intrusion of a deep scan, and the ghost ledger automatically uncloaked itself. It bypassed the standard user interface and unpacked its heavily encrypted data directly onto the primary auditing dashboard on the fourth floor. The revelation was surgical and devastating. The ledger laid out the complete, unfiltered history of every single illegal bypass command executed over the past quarter. Every time a defective medical device was forced through the compliance gates, the system had logged it. But the evidence did not point to the engineering floor. Attached to every single fraudulent transaction was a pristine, undeniable digital footprint. The logs perfectly displayed the static Internet Protocol address permanently assigned to the executive corner office, Valerie's exact workspace. Next to that, the system clearly displayed the unique hardware identifier belonging exclusively to Julian's corporate laptop. The data was cold, absolute, and completely devoid of human error. The system I built could not be manipulated, and it could not be lied to. Trapped in the boardroom, watching the undeniable proof of her federal crimes scroll across the projector screen, Valerie played her final, desperate card. She slammed the freshly printed confidentiality and personal data responsibility agreement onto the mahogany table, sliding it toward the lead government investigator. She hysterically pointed at my signature, claiming I had gone rogue and that I had legally assumed total responsibility for the data flow. The lead government lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman who specialized in corporate fraud, barely glanced at the heavy legal jargon. Her eyes locked instantly on the bottom line. She immediately pointed out the 15-degree downward skew of my handwriting, calmly explaining to the panicked executives that this specific deviation is a universally recognized forensic marker of signing a document under severe duress. Then, she delivered the killing blow using nothing but pure administrative logic. She looked Valerie dead in the eye and pointed out the glaring, fatal flaw in their trap. The contract explicitly forced me to accept legal liability for executive-level routing decisions. However, the internal network hierarchy, which the auditors had just downloaded, clearly proved I was never granted the administrative clearance to actually authorize those bypasses. You cannot legally hold a subordinate liable for overriding a system when they literally do not possess the digital permissions to do so. The contract was not a legal shield. It was a documented, signed confession of their conspiracy to frame a lower-level employee. The consequences escaped the glass walls of the building faster than the rumors could spread. The moment the federal agents began physically disconnecting the servers and boxing up the hard drives in the logistics department, the news leaked to the financial sector. Wall Street is a ruthless machine, and it reacted with brutal efficiency. In exactly 2 hours, the stock price of Aethirus Dynamics plummeted by 40%. Hundreds of millions of dollars in market capitalization simply vaporized into thin air. From my seat in the coffee shop, intercepting the metadata of the incoming network traffic, I watched the company's communication grids light up like a wildfire. The internal switchboards were completely overwhelmed. Major institutional investors, the massive hedge funds holding the financial lifeline of the corporation, were calling directly. They were screaming at the administrative assistants, demanding an immediate explanation for the federal raid and the sudden collapse of their investments. An emergency, closed-door meeting of the board of directors was convened immediately. Valerie was conspicuously absent, as she was currently detained in a separate room by federal agents for intensive questioning. The board members were left staring at a paralyzed, bleeding corporation. The entire medical data system, the absolute lifeblood of their revenue stream, remained hopelessly deadlocked in the maximum security state. They desperately brought in emergency third-party cybersecurity consultants, but the external engineers just stared at my heavily encrypted core architecture like it was an alien language. Sitting in that panicked room, the board of directors finally realized the terrifying truth of their situation. The only person on the planet who truly understood the algorithm, the only human being who held the key to unlock the crippled supply chain and save them from absolute bankruptcy, was currently sitting somewhere outside those walls, entirely beyond their control. Late that afternoon, As the sun began to dip below the city skyline, I opened a secure, encrypted email client on my burner phone. At exactly 4:30 in the afternoon, a new message arrived in my private inbox. It was routed through an anonymous proxy server, but the digital signature attached to the domain was unmistakable. It was a direct communication from a senior member of the board of directors. The subject line was completely empty. The body of the message contained only a few desperate sentences, abandoning all corporate pride and pleading for an immediate, unconditional negotiation. I smiled, locked the screen, and took a deep breath. The kings and queens of the boardroom were finally on their knees. I did not reply to the anonymous email sitting in my inbox. Typing out a written response would instantly imply that we were on equal footing, and we absolutely were not. Instead, I sent a single, unformatted text message to the private number provided in the signature block. I demanded that the board of directors call me directly over a voice line to formally demonstrate their submission. Exactly 10 minutes later, my burner phone rang. It was the chairman of the board. His voice, usually booming with untouchable corporate authority, sounded brittle, hollow, and utterly exhausted. He tried to open the conversation with standard corporate pleasantries, attempting to manage me like a typical rogue employee. I let him ramble for exactly 2 minutes about preserving shareholder value and finding a synergistic path forward before I sharply cut him off. "I do not care about your synergy," I said, my voice perfectly level. "I have exactly 3 non-negotiable conditions. If you try to alter a single one, I will hang up this phone, walk away forever, and let the federal government dismantle your company piece by piece. First, Valerie and Julian are to be terminated immediately. There will be no secret severance packages, no graceful public exits, and no golden parachutes. Second, the absurd confidentiality agreement I was forced to sign is legally voided and physically destroyed in the presence of my own attorney. Third, I am returning to the building on Monday morning, but I am not returning as your systems architect. I am returning as the interim chief executive officer, and I will have absolute unilateral control over all personnel and structural decisions. Take it or leave it." The chairman gasped, stammering over the phone. He desperately tried to argue, pointing out the catastrophic system crash and the massive financial damage my lockdown had supposedly caused. I let out a cold, genuine laugh that echoed in the small coffee shop. "I did not cause a crash," I told him, dropping the final, devastating truth directly onto his lap. That lockdown protocol, the one that froze the entire supply chain and trapped Valerie's illegal commands in a digital cage, that was not a technical glitch or an act of sabotage. That was the automated compliance fail-safe feature I formally pitched to Valerie exactly 6 months ago. She rejected it in writing because she explicitly claimed it would hinder aggressive business operations. I built it into the core architecture anyway, hidden deep beneath the surface. That exact feature is the only reason the federal government is not currently drafting indictments for every single member of your board for systemic, company-wide fraud. It isolated the crime completely to her office. I just saved you from federal prison. You are welcome." There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a quiet, thoroughly defeated agreement. Monday morning arrived with a crisp, clear sky. The air inside the grand lobby of Ethos Dynamics was dead silent. The security guard at the front desk, a man who had barely noticed my existence for the past 3 years, stood up completely straight and offered a deep, respectful nod as I walked through the revolving glass doors. I stepped into the private elevator and rode it up to the executive floor. The very first thing I saw when the polished metal doors slid open was Valerie. She was struggling to carry a heavy, overflowing cardboard box filled with her expensive desk ornaments, crystal awards, and framed photographs. She looked incredibly haggard, entirely stripped of her polished, predatory armor. Our eyes locked in the middle of the long hallway. I saw the pure, concentrated hatred, humiliation, and absolute defeat swirling in her frantic gaze. She opened her mouth, perhaps to hurl one last threat, or maybe to beg. But I did not break my stride. I did not slow down. I did not even blink. I walked right past her as if she were completely invisible. nothing more than a ghost haunting a hallway she no longer owned. I walked straight into the massive corner glass office. It still smelled faintly of expensive espresso and fresh lilies. I sat down behind the sprawling mahogany desk, resting my hands on the cool leather surface. I opened the master administrative console on the executive terminal and initiated the primary reboot sequence. I placed my thumb on the biometric scanner and leaned forward for the retinal sweep. My unique signature registered instantly, with a few swift keystrokes. I cleared out the corrupted cache files and purged the unauthorized routing queues from the system. Across the country, the massive logistics network slowly unfroze. The system interface on my monitor shifted from a violent, flashing red to a calm, steady green. It was running perfectly, operating flawlessly within the absolute, uncompromising limits of federal law. I leaned back deep into the heavy leather executive chair and turned it around to look out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling, bustling city far below. They thought they could strip away my rightful title and leave me outside to drown in their self-made storm. But the one they adamantly refused to crown simply gathered the shattered pieces of their empire and forged her own throne. Let this be the ultimate, unbreakable lesson of the corporate machine. Never, under any circumstances, hand the absolute life and death power of your entire system to the very person you intend to turn into your perfect scapegoat. Hello again, wonderful listeners. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for staying with me until the very end of this incredible story. I would absolutely love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please drop a comment and let me know your city or country. As I mentioned at the beginning, if you found today's story thrilling and satisfying, we really need your help. YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, which forces us to stop uploading new videos here in the foreseeable future. We are transitioning our entire operation over to Patreon. Please help support us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon community. By joining, you get to listen to the absolute best, most exclusive true stories that we simply cannot publicize on YouTube. These Patreon episodes are much longer, far more detailed, and feature incredible emotional voice acting that brings every dramatic moment to life. You can join us right now by simply scanning the quick response code currently on your screen, or by clicking the direct Patreon link provided in the video description or the pinned comment below. Thank you all again for your endless support, and I cannot wait to share the next exclusive story with you over there.